All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our monthly multidisciplinary webinar hosted by ICAT, ISPI Potomac, and the Professionista LLC. My name is Kimberly Leonard. I am a program manager here at ICAT, and today I will be serving two roles, both as a moderator and a panelist, as we discuss Riding the Fourth Industrial Revolution to Achieve Prosperity and Peace. Did you know that according to the World Economic Forum, the Fourth Industrial Revolution represents a fundamental change in the way we live, work, and relate to one another? It is a new chapter in human development, enabled by extraordinary technology advances commensurate with those of the first, second, and third industrial revolutions. These advances are merging the physical, digital, and biological worlds in ways that create both huge promise and potential peril. The speed, breadth, and depth of this revolution is forcing us to rethink how countries develop, how organizations create value, and even what it means to be human. The Fourth Industrial Revolution is about more than just technology-driven change. It is an opportunity to help everyone, including leaders, policymakers, and people from all income groups and nations, to harness converging technologies in order to create an inclusive, human-centered future. The real opportunity is to look beyond technology and find ways to give the greatest number of people the ability to positively impact their families, organizations, and communities. So as we get started, I encourage you to join us in the chat. Please provide your full name so we can greet you. We also know that many of our guests are tuning in not only from the US, but overseas as well. So share your city and country with your name so we can see just how global our reach has become. This multidisciplinary webinar, which we host on the third or fourth Thursdays at noon Eastern Standard Time, is intended for professionals and leaders who want to develop a multidisciplinary awareness of various disciplines, ranging from emerging and trending technologies, organizational improvement, engineering, data analytics, social transformation, and other topics. This webinar is recorded and circulated for the benefit of professionals who are within our circle. Did you know that ICAT Professional Services is a social enterprise with a purpose to enhance employability and to create jobs in our community? That's right. ICAT Professional Services is an organization that is committed to making your people and data greater. ICAT Professional Services is your partner for professional development, talent sourcing, data analytics, and societal impact. Our service offerings include Career Academy, outsourcing staffing and recruitment, applied data analytics, and social enterprise. To learn more about ICAT Professional Services, visit www.icat.net. For the career seekers watching this webinar, you may be wondering how to give yourself a competitive edge in a competitive job market while sharpening your skills. ICAT is ready to offer the following signature self-paced virtual programs: CompTIA A+, CompTIA Network Plus, CompTIA Security Plus, and our Agile Instructional Design Practitioner. You may also be wondering how to make yourself stand out in a stack of resumes from other qualified professionals for positions you're applying for. While credentials and skills may get you in the door, employment readiness is what makes you stand out from other candidates in the minds of interviewers and decision makers. ICAT is proud to offer a series of employment readiness experiences that prepare you to stand out. Some of these include certification exam prep, portfolio development, informational interviews, cohort peer support, coaching support, and professionalism development. If you'd like to learn more about how ICAT helps job seekers increase their chances of securing the right jobs and equips professionals who want to advance in their careers, visit icat.net. These enriching monthly multidisciplinary webinars wouldn't be possible without the support of our sponsors. We will now share a few details about our sponsor organizations. As we share, feel free to take a screenshot of the companies and organizations that you would like to connect with. First, we have ISPI Potomac, our first event co-sponsor. ISPI Potomac is the professional home for innovative leaders, educators, consultants, and designers in federal, state, and local government, as well as international development, education, and non-government organizations around the world. Members of ISPI Potomac share a commitment to community, collaboration, and co-creation to help make our world a better place for all. On the screen, you'll see that ISPI Potomac has highlighted Moonshot for Management. You'll see that they are united as a global community of knowledge collaborators energized to help co-create a brighter future through organizational development, learning and performance certifications, professional innovation, career and skill transformation, volunteership, and mentorship. For more information, please visit their website at ispi-dc.org. Our second co-sponsor is the Professionista LLC. The Professionista LLC brings your brand to life with creative storytelling and communication strategies that connect with your audience. From virtual events to in-person experiences, the company's founder, Jody Ann Bigby, speaks life into your content and your strategy in a way that is compelling, enriching, and memorable. The Professionista LLC provides brand storytelling strategy, communication strategy, empowerment keynotes, and voiceover artists, because what's a communication strategy without a voice to deliver it? So if your organization needs the right voice, a powerful voice to carry your message to your market in a way that makes you unforgettable and makes them want to work with you, text your organization's name and the word voice to 678-694-7763. For those of you joining us live, you have several webinar tools that you can use to enhance your experience. We invite you to engage in the chat and share any questions, comments, suggestions, and more that you may have. If time permits and we are able to open the floor for Q&A, you may raise your hand virtually to ask a question and use the unmute feature to ask your question live when you are called upon. We do ask that all video remains off throughout the webinar and audio remain on mute unless you are called on to speak. Keeping video and audio off helps to keep the focus on the presentation at hand, so we thank you in advance for honoring these standards. If you're joining from the Zoom mobile app or desktop site, the place to make your presence known is in our chat. Let us know what you think of the webinar in the chat area. We appreciate your feedback and thank you for it in advance. If you joined by dialing in from a phone, oops, I lost my place. There we go. We encourage you to update your Zoom settings to display your name and where you are tuning in from instead of your phone number so we can acknowledge you. Now let's jump right into the main event. My name is Kimberly Leonard, and I am moderating today as well as speaking to you about exploring new possibilities with smart learning. But today we're going to begin with Jonathan Tessier, who will be talking to you about developing new leadership capabilities for the fourth industrial revolution. I'd love to introduce you to Jonathan Tessier, who is an accomplished professional with 20 years of success in the field of training and employee development. He has helped lead teams in developing large-scale educational programs from ideation through implementation. He's also a skilled professional coach with a proven ability to generate transformative change in the relations of individuals, project teams, and departmental staff. Hi, Jonathan. How are you today?
I am doing well, Kimberly. Thank you for that introduction. And as Kimberly indicated, I am going to talk about developing new leadership capabilities as part of the fourth industrial revolution. If you recall from our webinar in September, I really emphasized and support the idea of not losing sight of people in this fourth industrial revolution. We can get all excited about the glamour of technology and what it can do and lose sight of the humanity that drives that. And so one person that we really need to think about in terms of the fourth industrial revolution and what's coming is that leader. and the leadership that is going to be necessary in order to implement and navigate this fourth industrial revolution so that no human beings are, I want to say left behind, but I think what would be more appropriate to say is swallowed up by all the fast-paced advances of technology. And that leader is going to play a really critical role in making sure that people can navigate it and ultimately succeed in that fourth industrial revolution. So we're going to look at developing new leadership capabilities that will be necessary as part of the fourth industrial revolution. Next slide, please. So as an introduction, let's just set the scene here. The fourth industrial revolution is going to be blurring the lines between people and technology. It's going to fuse the physical, digital, and biological worlds together. And blurring, I think, is a really good word to keep in mind, and also fuse or fusing is also another really good word to keep in mind, because that's the action that we're going to see happening in this new world that's being created. And so as a result of that, there's going to be an impact on a lot of the way people work and a lot of the way businesses produce value. And so that's going to, of course, impact industries, economics, societies, and really change how we view work in the future. And of course, businesses and governments both equally are going to need to adapt to those changes and ultimately support the workforce during this transition. And so if managed well, this future of work could be where people are able to fulfill their potential. And that's where the leadership plays an important role in making sure that nobody gets swallowed up by all of this and doesn't have the opportunities for that full expression of their potential. So how is this going to happen for leaders? Well, I want to outline for you some of the challenges that leaders are going to be facing, as well as some of the best practices that we're going to need to be thinking about when it comes to leadership during this fourth industrial revolution. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to show you a quick video that's going to show you a little bit of the challenges that leaders are going to be faced with when we're talking about leadership in the fourth industrial revolution. So really pay attention to this video and see the challenges, or what I like to call the dilemmas, that leadership will be facing.
Consider these 6 pairs of traits, thinking about the natural tension between each to achieve the perfect balance.
Being curious enough to question everything, but analytical and clear-headed enough to establish a firm direction.
Being open to uncertainty and emotional exposure, but self-aware and confident enough to inspire and empower others.
Being authentically empathetic as a leader, but able to make difficult decisions and bring others with you when it's time for action.
Being brave enough to disrupt and challenge the business, but knowing how to do so in an engaging and non-threatening way.
Being an encourager of creative thinking and risk-taking, but driven to see things through and achieve the business result.
Being quick to flex and adapt to changing circumstances, but able to control distractions, manage attention and keep focus.
Taken together, these pairings represent a new set of competencies for a rapidly changing business world. By achieving the right balance, the payoff is huge. Being curious, creative and brave in charting the organisation's path, and engaged, agile and driven to ensure its success. As with all things in life, balance is healthy.
Okay, thank you so much, Tiffany, for managing that for me. And, you know, what I really want to emphasize here, again, I like to pick up on key words because they hold so much meaning. When you think about what the narrator said at the very beginning of that video, he said that there's this tension that will exist for leaders, right? And you saw in that video that tension being played out between these different traits. And it feels sometimes like we have to fall into one of those categories of traits. And yet going forward, we're going to need to balance our ability to be in both of those traits, to have a foot in each one of those traits. And yet, when you look at them, those traits seem like they're diametrically opposed to one another, right? And that's the dilemma. And so when we think about leaders going forward in this fourth industrial revolution, we can't just say, just roll up your sleeves and do it, or, you know, suck it up and brave through it and all that. It's more of a challenge than we realize just on the surface of reacting to something. It really means that leaders are going to have to make an assessment of what traits they have, what traits they prefer. So in that tension, where's my tendency go towards, and how am I going to work at becoming more of that seemingly opposite trait? And then I think what's really critical is then to be able to live in that place of tension between those two traits. So leaders are going to need to evolve rapidly and adapt to these changing demands that you just saw in that video. And think about it. Think about all that leaders are going to have to do. On the one hand, they're going to have to be there to help drive people's ability to absorb all these technological advances. They are at the same time going to need to champion and foster that innovation that is hitting them. They're going to have to incorporate new work models. And ultimately, in all of this, they play a key role in attracting and retaining and developing this future workforce. I mean, think about that. That's a lot to juggle for leaders. And I'll put on top of that these additional things that leaders are going to have to be aware of. Leaders are going to have to see social initiatives as part of business. They're going to have to make decisions based on a lot of data that is coming at them. They're going to have to disrupt the status quo with those innovations and think about the resistance there could be to maintaining that status quo because it feels safe. And then finally, for all of that, invest in retraining employees so that they can thrive in this new environment. So leaders are going to have to wear a lot of different hats as this industrial revolution hits them, and then react quickly. Next slide. So leaders are going to play a very crucial role in defining strategies going forward, and especially defining strategies for the people that work for them. And so by managing this people and the implications around what's going to happen with the workforce, the leaders play a crucial role in ensuring that the businesses, their organizations that they're a part of are successfully adopting and deploying all this new technology. And while that new technology is being deployed, at the same time supporting employees in adapting to and transitioning to that'll happen in their roles as a result of this new technology. So employees are going to be faced with tasks and skills changes. They're going to have to learn how to integrate this technology into their roles, and the expectations around what this workplace will become. That's going to be a lot of change for people, and change is uncomfortable for us, and it's going to hit them at a very fast pace. So leaders are really going to have to be that key personnel that helps those workforce individuals adjust to these new changes. Now, in order to do that, I have here 5 key imperatives that leaders are going to need to implement, they're going to need to think about. And let's go through each of them. So next slide, please. So here are the 5 key imperatives that leaders are going to have to be thinking about in this 4th industrial revolution. So number 1 is new leadership capabilities that they're going to have to possess. 2, they're going to have to manage this integration of the technology that's going to be hitting us at a very rapid pace. 3, they're going to have to enhance the employee experience, right? I mean, if it's a good employee experience, there's going to be more willingness to change than if it's a bad employee experience, people are going to resist that change. 4, build agile and personalized learning. And I'm excited that Kimberly is going to be talking about smart learning after my presentation, because that has a lot to do with what you see there in step number 4, or imperative number 4. And then 5, establish human capital metrics. Really rely on that human capital and the metrics involved with that to get an idea of what's going on. So let's give you a little bit more information around each of these 5 imperatives. So let's start with the first one, which is to have the leadership capabilities really be looked at. So next slide, please. When we're talking about new leadership capabilities, think about that leader needing to be on the edge, on that cutting edge. And that might not be a comfortable place for all leaders to be, but that's where leaders have to be in order for the adoption of the right technologies to take place, in order to drive this new vision of the organization and the culture, and to shape innovative strategies for how people are going to work. And you can't do that if you're not, as that image shows you, right at the tip of the arrow, right? You got to be right there and be able to react to what's coming, whether it's technology, whether it's changes to the organization, or whether it's innovation in the way people are going to work. So some of the best practices that leaders can sort of embrace or incorporate would be to admit that there's going to be ambiguity. And let people know up front that we're going to have to do our best to explain a lot of ambiguous moments because things are rapidly developing. Think about also the leader having to combine their operational skills with their technology challenges and their people management skills. There's 3 different things that they're clearly going to have to juggle in this new 4th industrial revolution. And then on top of that, to also use analytics, all that data, as a key tool to understand what's going on in the business and what's going on with their workforce. So that's some of those capabilities that leaderships have to be aware of and then develop. Next slide. Secondly, leaders are going to have to be able to manage the integration of technology in the workplace. So the way the work gets done will change, and leaders will need to be able to combine that human workforce piece with the automation that's going to be coming. And we want to make sure that there's a positive impact that automation is having on the human workforce. I think we can all agree that when we hear of automation, there's this tendency to think that means that what the human is doing is going to be replaced. And that's not true. All that automation means is let's not have people doing things repetitively that some machine can do, but that doesn't take away from the human being. The human being still has to be there innovating and designing and challenging the status quo and coming up with the rules and engagement of that machine. So they're going to play a different role, and they have to understand that shift. So some of the best practices that leaders can be thinking about when it comes to this idea of managing that integration of technology is they're going to have to build strategies to reinvent people's jobs, not eliminate them, but reinvent them. And part of that reinvention is to give people new skills and to redeploy their talents. We still need the talents of people in order to make this happen, but we may have to redeploy those talents in a new way. And so employees need or leaders need to see that there are going to be this need for skills, but maybe using those skills in different ways and being able to communicate that to people, because they'll be a little uncertain about all the change that they're facing. Next slide. The third imperative is for leaders to enhance the employee experience. So there's going to be this increasing complexity in the workforce and the use of that technology, and that's going to change the way work is experienced by employees. And leaders will need to help create meaningful experiences for those employees. So in terms of best practices, leaders need to think about, still in the face of all this technology, having that workplace be human-centric and purposeful for the employee. So we have to rethink and invest in employee well-being and use technology to engage employees, not replace them, but engage them, because it needs to be that fusion, as we said at the start of the presentation, between employee and technology. Number 4, next slide, please. Build agile and personalized learning. And so think about the leader will need to foster a culture of lifelong learning. So you're always going to have to be updating your competencies. And so there may be a decline for certain skills, and yet at the same time, every time there's a decline of certain skills that are needed, there's going to be an emergence of new skills that are needed. And so there's going to be a requirement of employee talent to continuously learn, unlearn, and relearn new skills. Leaders are going to really play a critical role in making sure that's happening for their people. And so some of the best practices that leaders can be implementing are to, number 1, create this culture of lifelong learning, and know that it's a shared responsibility between the employee and management to make sure those new skills are offered and learned by the employee. Also engage in employees and manage the employees that are at risk with losing elements of their job, if you will, to skills that are no longer necessary, and help them to transition to those new skills that will be needed. And so there will be a lot of need to track and measure skills that are needed in the organization. And number 5, finally, next slide. Establish human capital metrics. And so what we're getting at here is that leaders will use human capital, again, what we know and our skills and our competencies are going to be so vital in the fourth industrial revolution. And we've got to look at that human capital and the metrics around it and see about key performance drivers and continuously demonstrate the impact that the human capital is having on the performance of the business. So some of the leadership best practices to address this will be that leaders will need to use new technologies and data to develop these human capital metrics. Some of them might not exist. Use technology and data to drive business decision making and create external reporting on the value and the value added of human capital to the equation. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, what I want you to remember is that when in the last webinar, I said that human capital was going to be a key factor in the creation of innovation and therefore a business being competitive in this fourth industrial revolution. So there's going to be this increase in the complexity of employee tasks, and when those are assigned to modern professionals, it's going to be a requirement of them to constantly improve upon their competencies. And it's going to be, therefore, up to leaders to play a very vital role in facilitating employee needs during this fourth industrial revolution. So leaders are going to really need to put on multiple hats, but the goal in all of this is to make it successful for employees so that they can reach their potential. And with that, thank you for listening to my presentation, and I will hand it back to you, Kimberly.
Thank you, Jonathan. At this time, if you have a question for Jonathan, I would encourage you to either type it in the chat, or if you would like to use the raise your hand feature, I can call on you. We did have one question pop up while you were presenting, Jonathan, and that's from Gabe. And he said, balance in leadership traits makes a lot of sense. How do you navigate playing to one's strengths versus maintaining balance of traits?
That is the first reaction, Gabe, I have to that is that can only happen if we have an awareness of ourselves. And we have if we can sort of, this is going to sound a little weird, but if we can sort of separate or detach ourselves a little from who we are and what we do and see our preferences for how we like to do things. And in that self-awareness, we can then make conscious decisions to start incorporating those other traits that aren't our preference. If we're not aware of our preference and not aware of how we automatically gravitate towards those preferences, we'll struggle with seeing how something can be done any other way. But if we separate ourselves a little bit from it and grow an awareness of sort of analyzing ourselves, we can start to see our preference and therefore incorporate those traits that may seem opposite of that, or those traits that I wouldn't say are opposite. I would like to look at it as complementary to what we're already a strength in.
Thank you, Jonathan. We have another comment in the chat from Gabe, who says, research is showing a growing need for versatile leaders and versatile talents, and that jobs become automated. I appreciate your insights on how to accelerate this versatility readiness. By the way, we created this multidisciplinary webinar to advance this need. Thanks, Gabe. Any other questions for Jonathan? All right, well, if you think of other questions or comments, you are always welcome to put those in the chat. At this time, we're going to move forward to our second presentation, and I'm going to be speaking to you today about exploring new possibilities with smart learning. So before we go to the next slide, in the chat, I'm going to ask you a trivia question. When do you think smart or adaptive learning technology was first developed? So put a year, or I'll accept decades as well. Put your guess for when you think smart or adaptive learning technology was first developed. Any guesses out there? Somewhat of a multiple choice question. I'll give you a hint, it's within the last century. Gabe said 100 years ago, okay. Other guesses? Jonathan said 60. Tiffany says 70. All right, good guesses. And I realize, this question may be somewhat subjective, but if you want to go to the next slide, I'm going to make the argument that the idea of adaptive learning was first introduced by a man named B.F. Skinner, who developed a teaching machine. And this is a picture of that machine. The design was a rectangular wooden box with a hinged metal lid and various paper discs fit inside with questions and answers written along the radii of the disc. So one question would appear in the window at a time. The student would write their answer on a paper tape to the right and advance the mechanism, and then they would get immediate feedback on whether or not their answer was correct. So we've come a long way, obviously, but this just goes to show that the idea of adaptive learning is not new. In fact, in the 1970s, it was a common thought that computers would eventually achieve the human ability to adapt and provide adaptive learning. The constraints were, of course, where technology was at the time. So artificial intelligence was not nearly as affordable or practical as it is nowadays. But the idea here that I want to emphasize kind of throughout this presentation is that the goal with smart learning or adaptive learning is to simulate a one-on-one teaching experience. And this goes back to what Jonathan was talking about in terms of being able to customize the way that we train, the way that we learn, the way that we simply adapt to information. Because the goal is not just to automate so that we can make learning more efficient. If we want learning to be effective, everyone knows that one-on-one learning is the most customized option. And that's why one-on-one learning has been such a privilege and something that's hard to achieve for everyone in the past. And so technology gives us hope that we can really create more and more one-on-one teaching experiences. And so when we get to today, I'm going to talk a little bit about this idea of adaptive learning 3.0, which is artificial intelligence and machine learning assisted technology. We'll go to the next slide, please. So for the purposes of my presentation, I want to clarify why I'm using the word smart, because adaptive learning, as we just said, has been around for decades. So adaptive learning is an instructional methodology designed to adjust to the needs of individuals. Smart learning is the introduction of data science, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to improve and extend those adaptive learning capabilities. Next slide, please. So let's talk for a minute about some of the common challenges that you may have experienced with asynchronous learning. So feel free to put your own thoughts in the chat. Have you taken a training online? Have you enrolled yourself in some sort of course, maybe even a college course where a lot of the learning was self-directed? what challenges did you run into? Some of the ones that I listed, one is this idea of getting stuck. So if you've ever been in a quiz or a question where you just can't get the right answer and you get stuck there because there's no live instructor to either provide you with tailored feedback or to advance you to the next lesson, that room for human error is sometimes lost with technology. Another one is reviewing unnecessary material. So in the past, online learning courses have driven people all through the same pathway. So regardless of your background knowledge, you would be fed the exact same lessons, the exact same quizzes, and that may be unnecessary for you and inefficient of your time. Also in the idea of following a prescribed path, there's no practical application at times. So maybe the subject is broad enough that it's being applied to all sorts of different industries. You know, maybe something like data analysis can be used in business, it can be used in education, it can be used in the medical field. But if there's no practical application for it, then that knowledge is not going to be nearly as effective in helping you do your job or continue in the path that pertains to you. Another challenge is the inability to effectively use learner data. So one of the benefits that I'm going to talk about in just a second has to do with how does this technology actually help those who are designing the training to capture as well as use learner data. And the last one is this idea of continuous improvement, which I will also come back to. But there's capabilities with technology nowadays that the training can actually learn more about you while you're in the training, so that its ability to serve you actually improves while you're taking the course. Let's go to the next slide, please. So this is a graphic, and I just thought this might be helpful in kind of capturing some of these main benefits of adaptive learning. And this is presented in the sense of corporate training, but of course it could apply in a lot of different areas. So I touched on this a bit, the idea of one-on-one instruction. This confidence-based approach is also a really interesting idea because again, this is something that traditionally only a live instructor could gauge. You look for things like body language, tone of voice, you know, how are your students or your participants responding? Are they hesitant? Are they confident? Those are things that traditionally you have to be a human to understand. However, there are ways that can be measured. Using that data, they can feed different questions, different lessons, different supplements in order to increase the confidence of those taking the course. Personalized learning for a heterogeneous group, similar along the lines of one-to-one instruction, provides focused remediation and creates individualized learning paths. And of course, all of that feeds into greater time efficiency. So I'm going to go into just a little bit more depth on a couple of these on the next slide. So this idea of complex and instant adaptations to learner behavior and performance. And again, as I'm presenting these benefits, you know, my goal here is to just increase your awareness of what's out there. The way that you go about this, there are so many different tools and softwares out there nowadays that you can explore on how to do this, as well as just to be aware that it's possible. I think allows us, in whatever capacity that you are training someone or looking to, kind of like I talked about in our last webinar, you know, the need to upskill and to reskill our workforce is greater than it has been in terms of the speed and the complexity, you know, going back to what Gabe mentioned about versatile talent. So all of this is just designed to show you kind of this is what's out there, and how you do that is up to you. So again, data-driven personalized feedback, remediation, and reinforcement. Having been a teacher myself, that's one of the biggest challenges with one-on-one instruction that I encountered, is how to identify through formative assessments where the gaps are in individuals' learning, and also to be able to remediate that in a timely manner. Because when you're in a class of 30 and maybe even teaching 6 of those classes in a day, as a typical high school teacher would do, the opportunity for remediation is very, very limited, because you cannot devote time to the individual in the same way that you have to keep moving forward for the majority. So again, this is where smart learning really shines. Also, this idea of predictive insights. So there is technology that is able to interpret the data of where students are headed, so to speak, and project, this is where we anticipate their knowledge will be on this subject by the end of this lesson, and therefore feed the appropriate knowledge to meet them at that level of mastery. Also, on a personal note, with the commitment to mastery, I think this is another good point, is that mastery is again tailored to the individual, and the idea of being able to track individuals' mastery has been something that is overwhelming, intimidating, just not realistic when you have 150, let's say, different participants. So smart learning comes in to help with that. And one of the ways it does that is by not only tracking an individual's mastery, but having the resources through the branching and the software to be able to feed the right response right away without a human having to recognize and then go and find the right response. And then the last one here, I think I've touched on pacing, so I'll just jump to the last one, is that assessing the performance of learning content and flagging it for revision. That's something that not only helps the participant, but that helps the designer of the learning. It really allows for a quicker process to be aware of how is this learning being perceived, is it being effective, and knowing exactly where to go in and revise. All of those things feed into a much more adaptive learning experience. Next slide, please. So now that I've kind of sold you on the benefits, let me talk for a second about the limitations. So there is a human side to learning, of course, and there are subjective materials. I taught English in the past, and I was pretty confident that I could grade an essay better than a computer, because my ability to assess the thinking behind it, the tone, and those sorts of more human elements was important. So the same is still true. Artificial intelligence has not reached the point where something that is that subjective is going to be effectively graded by a computer. So I encourage you, as you're thinking about smart learning applications for your organization, you may want to start with things that are objective, skills that can be measured in a way that is clearly demonstrated and can be somewhat consistent with a standard, really. And so automatic grading, of course, is an amazing tool, but it doesn't apply when it can't be graded really by a right or wrong or by a set standard. Next slide. So I have really 2 ideas for you today, and these are very simple, but again, I believe in the power of awareness. So keeping all of these possibilities in mind, where do we go from here? Because we are at a point where we have the technology to do a lot of these things. So I would encourage you, at whatever state of smart learning or training or knowledge sharing, mentoring, anything in your organization or your personal life where you are trying to train people or teach people, think about how you can continue to iterate. We are not going to get to the final goal overnight. In fact, the whole idea of smart learning would encourage us to adapt. It would encourage us that it's going to be a process. And so I would just encourage you to look for, what is the next improvement I can make? And those improvements will add up to a much better experience for your participants. And stay curious. So I think I touched on this quite a bit last time, because the fourth industrial revolution, in my mind, is all about rapid change. That means that we have to stay curious and look for what are the new technologies, what are the new capabilities, what are the new possibilities. You know, I use that word very intentionally because they change all the time. And if we're not curious, we can miss out on a new tool or a new opportunity to improve our ability to train. So with that, I believe we had at least one question or comment in the chat. So I'm going to pull that up really quick. Gabe says, question, I like the adaptive smart learning system in its ability to address learning experiences of the needs of the learner. How can this system be used to enable stale trainers who believe sharing information is not training? I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding your question correctly. So is the question, Gabe, about using smart learning as kind of a model to encourage trainers to engage with their participants?
Yes. So,
Okay.
Kimberly, in your, may I speak?
Yes, please.
So, you know, I think you began by saying a live trainer can adjust based on the tone and the hesitation and the needs and stuff, which is true. And then at the same time, you may have trainers who just, you know, who think like reading the material or sharing information is teaching, which is not the case. So I'm wondering if this, you know, the system that you are speaking about may be used to also train people who are in the training, live training business, to be more adaptive, to listen to the audience, to adjust, to engage. So it's kind of like, can technology be used to, you know, reverse engineer the brain of the trainers or whoever, you know, those who are not trained to be more adaptive and responsive?
That's a really interesting question, Gabe. And, you know, of course, my mind goes, I don't see why not. Although this type of technology and the application that I'm speaking of is primarily for asynchronous training, as opposed to what I would consider a live trainer would be a live training. So there are certainly things that could apply across the two of them, even though the trainings themselves may be a little bit different in terms of the way that they're designed. But I know that one way that I have done that with the trainers I work with, for example, is the pathway that I might create for an e-learning course. You know, as an instructional designer, I would have my list of, you know, I'm going to use these types of engagement tools, for example. And that's something that I can pass over to a live trainer and say, these are some of the engagement tools that will set you up for success. You know, these are some of the ideas and the components of training that must be included in order to achieve an engaging conversation about this topic, as opposed to just a straight presentation of information. Are there other questions or comments? All right, well, with that, I think we're going to go ahead and close for today. We appreciate again that you joined us today for our October multidisciplinary webinar. We want to invite you to join us again on November 18th at noon for our next multidisciplinary webinar, the third and final installment of this thought-provoking series, Writing the Fourth Industrial Revolution to Achieve Prosperity and Peace. Thank you all again for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.